Let me get to the right document. So I'd like to call to order a special business meeting on the budget presentation of the Portland Board of Public Education. It is Tuesday, March 14th, 2023. We're meeting in Zoom completely due to the weather tonight. Superintendent Townsend, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Member Bilyeu. Member Bondo. Member Bryden.
Here.
Member Figdor.
Here.
Member Grant.
Here.
Member Opperman.
Here.
Member Russell Better.
Here.
Member Youssef. Member Ellis. Member Amond.
Here.
Member McLaughlin. Member Santiago. And Chair Lentz.
Here. And I did see Representative Ellis in the attendees. I think she's coming over, and Member Bondo is now here as well, as is Member Youssef. Just saying those out loud for folks that are at home. Beautiful. So now I'd like to move us into the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Just waiting for our flag. I think, perfect. Thank you very much. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Beautiful. And the Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand. The Wolastoqiyik, or Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki Confederacy, or People of the Dawnland. We are honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we are committed to making the past, present, and future of Wabanaki peoples visible in our school and our classrooms. And then I'm going to move us into public comment. And as a reminder about public comment, it's open to anything we are not voting on tonight. The board may not respond to comments, and please refrain from responding in the Zoom chat, which I'm not even sure is a possibility, but no complaints or allegations will be allowed in public concerning any staff member or any person connected with the school district. To give public comment, please raise your Zoom hand tonight, and then you will have 3 minutes after you're called on. You will when you come off of mute, please introduce yourself with your name and address. I'll keep the time, and when you've reached 2 minutes and 30 seconds, I will let you know. And then at 3 minutes, I will let you know that you've reached the end of your time. If you'd like additional time, please request it, and we can see if we can give it to you. All right, so with that said, if there's anyone in Zoom that would like to give public comment, please raise your hand. All right, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment and turn it over to the superintendents for the fiscal year 24 budget presentation.
Thank you, Chair Lentz. We'll just get the presentation up and then we'll get started. All right. Okay. Good evening, school board and community. My name is Malia Nally, co-superintendent, and I'm joined this evening by co-superintendent Erin Townsend and budget director Miranda Fasulo, and together we're eager to present to you the superintendent's proposed FY24 budget. We appreciate everyone who has been engaged in learning more about the background context pertaining to our budget through the community forum, board workshops, and via the 3-part video series we shared over the past month. One of our goals for the development and rollout of the FY24 budget was to create transparency into the process and decision points in order to build shared understanding of the budget and to work towards strengthening trust across the district and within the community. Before we get started, I wanted to share a few acronyms that you'll hear several times this evening and throughout this process in an effort to make this technical language more accessible to folks. If we use other acronyms or jargon that you don't understand, please always ask. We try not to do that, but we are self-aware that we still do. So first, FY. This refers to the fiscal year. The budget we are presenting this evening is for FY24, which goes from July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024. The next is FTE, and this stands for full-time equivalent, and it's used when we're planning staffing. A 1.0 FTE is a full-time position, whereas a 0.5 FTE is a half-time position. Next is ESSERF, and this is the acronym for the federal grant we received for COVID response and recovery. To be honest, I had to Google what it stands for today, and so I wouldn't worry about remembering it if you get that it's our federal grant in response to COVID, but for the record, it stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. And then PD, this stands for Professional Development and is commonly used within education. So there will be more, so just give us a wave if we need to be more clear. Our budget theme for this year is focused on the core of what we do, strengthening academics and behavioral health and shoring up our operational systems to enable us to stay focused on fulfilling our promise to support all of our students to become prepared and empowered to pursue their dreams. As for the flow of our presentation, we'll start with some context setting around our Portland Promise goals and the investments we've been making in our budgets since FY19. We'll review some high-level leading indicator data in relationship to our return on those investments, and then we'll describe our FY24 budget priorities and strategy. We'll then step through the financial detail and synthesize everything by priority area. Tonight's meeting is intended to present the budget so that you can refer it to the Finance Committee for deeper discussion and work. So we'll end by summarizing the next steps. Like the past many budgets, this budget was developed to align to our Portland Promise goals of achievement, whole student, and people, with equity woven throughout each of the strategies aligned to these goals. Each year, we align what we call our annual priorities to these goals and focus on strategies aligned to those priorities. For the past several years, we've been focused on strengthening our core instruction by ensuring we have high-quality curriculum materials, professional development, and are dismantling systemic barriers to grade-level learning for all students. We've been focused on cultivating safe and equitable schools by shifting from punitive to restorative discipline practices, ensuring there is a clear, positive, and systematic behavioral support system in place, deepening social emotional learning opportunities for students, as well as strengthening opportunities for students to elevate their voices to help create school communities where everyone feels like they belong. And finally, we've been focused on growing our professional learning culture with an emphasis on increasing the diversity of our team and creating ongoing opportunities for people to grow their ability to be equity-oriented educators. We're grateful to the board and to the community for supporting investments in the Portland Promise goals since FY19. These investments have been designed to strengthen core instruction by increasing resources for high-quality curriculum tools, enabling embedded professional development through student-centered coaching, and by uplifting the expertise of our teachers to create shared instructional vision by growing paid teacher leadership roles. These budgets have expanded access to high-quality pre-K and increased investments in differentiated supports for multilingual learners and students with IEPs. Additionally, we've expanded our mental and behavioral health supports, as well as the youth development programming, and we've built out the Department of Diversity, Equity, and Belonging. You can see how these investments have broken down over time, starting with investments in behavioral health and youth development. Then in FY20, a big expansion of pre-K and the launch of the full Breathe continuum of services for students with significant emotional and behavioral disabilities, as well as investments in math. In FY21, you can see continued investments in pre-K and curriculum, as well as an expansion of our Beach continuum of services for students with autism or ASD. In FY22, these themes continued, and we made a sizable investment in ESOL teachers in alignment with our LAU plan. This was the year we moved some of our diversity, equity, and belonging investments into the local budget, as they had all been grant funded up to this point, and we added more social workers. Highlights from FY23 include the integration of the high school equity enhancement methodology and the restructuring of our resources for elementary libraries to enable full-time librarians across most of our mainland elementary schools. I'm going to pass it over to Superintendent Townsend to give a brief overview of some of the leading indicators we are tracking to monitor how these investments are yielding the intended impact. So, Aaron.
Thank you, Malia. Good evening, board members and members of the Portland Public Schools community. As Malia mentioned, we have been monitoring a number of different indicators to inform our overall work towards our Portland Promise goals. We are aware that there are persistent achievement and equity gaps in our data, and that our progress towards closing these has been impacted by the pandemic. However, we do see progress with some leading indicators that show we are on track to see improvement in these broader outcomes, and thus need to continue to maintain our investments and deepen our implementation of our current priorities. I will do a brief review of each of the indicators you see listed here in the following slides. First, in terms of our achievement and equity goals, you'll see our first leading indicator data as it relates to pre-K. As discussed in a recent board session, we have seen significant positive progress on our pre-K implementation. Our data shows that we have increased both the overall number of students served and are offering a consistent high-quality experience for students as measured by the assessment protocol class that is referenced in the slide. This progress sets the stage for these learners to carry these positive experiences throughout their educational careers. The next indicator that we have been tracking is related to our math work. We are beginning to see system-wide math results across our schools. The fall 2020 NWEA math scores shows 40% of our 3rd through 5th graders scoring in the top 3 performance bands. By the fall of 2022, this number has increased to 53%. We believe that by investing in the high-quality curriculum and instructional coaching in all schools, we are creating the conditions for success. Having a common curriculum allows teachers to collaborate with each other across classrooms and within schools to plan units or support individual students. Instructional coaches support teachers in planning, data analysis, and differentiation to ultimately give more students access to rigorous, engaging content. And we're seeing opportunity gaps begin to close in some of our schools as well. The final slide related to our achievement and equity goals is about the indicators for our focus on multilingual learners. Our LAU plan investments are showing growth for our multilingual learners in both academic achievement and language development. This slide shows the increases of multilingual learners on their math and ELA assessments and increased proficiency rates for upper-level multilingual learners. Multilingual students who reach English proficiency are likely to do as well or better than students who are English only. The recent LAU plan investments have allowed for one ESOL teacher per grade level or content area in schools with high multilingual student populations to help with planning, collaboration, and assessment. And these investments have contributed to a higher exit rate in elementary schools with a concentration of multilingual students. Students who are developing their English proficiency will struggle on these English-only tests, highlighting the need to continue to provide intensive English language development supports to accelerate students' language growth. Now, to turn our attention to the whole student equity goals, our first indicator is around our suspension data. This graph compares the past 4 years through year-to-date in March. And as it reflects, we are seeing significant reductions in the number of both in-school and out-of-school suspensions. While we see this as progress in our efforts to grow safe and equitable schools, we recognize that there is further progress to be made to continue to reduce the disproportionality of these disciplinary outcomes. The second leading indicator that we monitor for our whole student inequity goal is chronic absence. As these graphs demonstrate, we are seeing significant impacts from the pandemic on our chronic absence rates. For some demographic groups, this year we are beginning to see these rates start to recede, but there are others, most concerningly our Latinx population, where these chronic absence rates remain stubbornly high. This indicator demonstrates the continued needs we have to meaningfully engage students and make the schools places where students feel a sense of belonging. The last indicator for our whole student inequity goals that we monitor is our student survey. We have been administering this survey regularly, and we track specifically the questions that relate to student sense of safety and their connection to at least one adult in their school as our key indicators. The data in the top charts indicates positive growth on both measures, generally across grade spans, in the years prior to the pandemic and during that first hybrid COVID year. Our most recent results at the bottom of the slide indicate some regression on these data points as we continue to respond to the increased mental and behavioral health needs of our students. Now, in terms of our last Port One Promise goal area of people inequity, we track two different indicators. The first is the increase in the number of our staff that identify as people of color. We have exceeded our initial goals for increasing the diversity of our staff. Our goal was to get to above 10% by 2022, and we are at 14% by that point for all employee groups. When we break it down, you can also see significant progress across the different employee types, with the greatest gains in the diversification of our school leadership team. The other leading indicator that we track related to our people inequity goal is what's called our Net Promoter Score. This people measure comes from our annual employee engagement survey, the TNTP Insight Survey, which we have been doing for the past 5 years. The Net Promoter Score is based on a rating of how likely someone is to recommend working at PPS on a scale of 1 to 10. Employees who indicate a 9 or a 10 are considered promoters, and the Net Promoter Score is then calculated by taking the percent of staff that are promoters and subtracting the percent of staff that are detractors, those that give it a rating of 0 to 6. The range of a possible score then is negative 100 to positive 100, and anything greater than 0 is considered good, and a score above 50 is considered excellent. As you can see, we were making progress in our promoter score as a reflection of the growing of a strong culture over the first few years of the survey. Obviously, last year saw some regression in this indicator as we grappled with our return from the pandemic years of remote and hybrid schooling, and were confronted with the ongoing challenges in our post-pandemic world, as were many schools, organizations, and businesses across the country. For us, the combination of the increased student needs, academically and mentally and behaviorally, and diminished resources, specifically the staffing shortages we've had, made for a very challenging year last year. We believe that we need to sustain the investments we've been making in our people and our students to address the pandemic recovery challenges in front of us and grow a positive, equity-oriented professional learning community. Overall, these indicators show that we're beginning to see the kinds of results that will lead to the longer-term outcomes and changes in closing the opportunity gaps and improving achievement for all students, and that these indicators give us confidence that our most prudent move is to stay the course and deepen our ongoing work. Malia?
And this brings us to our priorities for the FY24 budget that is in front of you this evening. In developing these priorities, we took in feedback from many stakeholders across our system, including direct engagements with our school and department leaders, reviewing the priorities that emerged from the extensive engagements across the community pertaining to what people want from the next superintendent, pulling from the emerging themes that came out of the listening sessions the board did with staff, and based on hundreds of other conversations, emails, and smaller group discussions with staff and members of the community. First, it's important to understand the budget pressures we are facing, which, to be frank, are significant this year. We're facing a sizable increase to our rollover budget based on increases to salaries per our negotiated contracts, as well as from the impact of inflation and the cost of debt service. As you well know, our operational enablers, such as payroll, have been exposed for their gaps, and we can no longer limp along with underinvesting in these core functions. As Dr. Valenzuela and Carlos Gomez shared at the last board meeting, we are welcoming an unprecedented number of new students during the year, the vast majority of whom are multilingual learners needing intensive English language development services and who are enrolling in large groups, about 50 to 75 per month right now, through our intake department. We're seeing a big increase to our costs for the out-of-district special education services that a small number of our students require. And at the same time, we're losing grant funds that have been supporting several core pieces of our strategy, and we're experiencing a loss in state funding despite our rising costs. So given these budget pressures and our commitments to our long-term strategy, we've established the following budget priorities. First, we strongly believe that we must maintain our commitment to the Portland Promise goals and strategies, and despite the multitude of pressures, avoid going backwards in terms of the resource gains we've made in the past many years. We need to be responsive to our current context, which means adjusting our resources to the hundreds of new students we have and continue to welcome into our school communities. And we need to set our educators up for success by ensuring they have the right supports to help them create a sense of belonging for all of their students while differentiating for the huge range of needs in their classrooms. And finally, we simply must put some resources back into some of the district operational functions to ensure we're running an efficient and effective organization. So if we put this all together with dollar figures, you can see that the total baseline rollover cost increase is $7.7 million, or about a 6% increase over last year's budget. The drivers of this increase are salaries, debt service, and the other category, which is largely inflation related. On top of that, we're receiving $2.4 million less in state subsidy as compared to what we received last year. So to stay status quo and not make any new investments, we would need a tax rate increase of 8.7%. Then, if you were to add in the proposed investments in response to the budget pressures and align to our budget priorities, we'd need to add another $7.1 million, which combined with the rollover budget would result in a tax rate increase of 15.5%. We understand that a 15.5% tax rate increase on the school side is not tenable for our taxpayers. And so we're approaching this budget with an awareness that we need to find ways to cut back from what we believe is needed and to make hard choices about what we are and are not advancing in this budget. In order to do this, we're taking the following approach. Our proposed budget aims to preserve core programming aligned to our priorities and minimizes any new investments. We are leveraging reserves while also being cognizant of a multi-year strategy for how we will spend down reserves over time, given the future budget forecast is equally, if not more, challenging. We're going to lean on the remaining ESSER funds available to us while we have them, including moving some of our local investments over into the grant in order to hold on to them for another year. And despite these strategies, we're also making reductions to our local budget, and we're cutting investments in our ESSER grant that we had intended to carry over for another year in order to make space for some of the essential FTEs and non-salary investments currently in our local budget. As we contemplated where to make reductions, we aim to spread out the cuts across departments and priority areas to avoid any significant loss of programming, which we were not entirely able to do, as you'll see in a moment. And finally, we are highlighting for the board and the community that we need to engage in difficult conversations about initiating larger structural changes for the future, most of which require us to start engaging with the community this spring, so that we don't surprise anyone with large unexpected changes to how we organize schooling in Portland in the future. We also need to activate advocacy at the state level to make adjustments to the school funding formulas for our unique context so that we aren't left having to continually cut away from our schools. I'll pass it over to Miranda, who will now step through the financial overview of our proposed budget, and then Erin and I will come back and synthesize where we're landing by each priority area. So Miranda.
Thank you, Malia, and good evening, everyone. So I'm going to begin with a high-level overview of the proposed local budget, and then with ESSER funding really being an integral part of the total budget for the coming year, I'll also provide a little background on our pandemic-related funding to date and a summary of what is proposed to be funded by ESSER in FY24. The superintendent's FY24 recommended budget is a budget of $141.3 million, which represents an increase of 6.1% over the current year budget and an increase of $8.2 million. With regard to tax impact, this budget requires a 7% increase to the school tax rate. And here are the specifics behind those key figures. This slide compares the proposed FY24 budget to this year's FY23 budget, with increase amounts and percentages on the right shaded in gray. You can see that the proposed budget increase is driven by an increase in salaries and benefits, but also by notable increases in debt service and in non-salary expenses. On the revenue side, we're seeing a substantial reduction to non-tax funding sources, which is just more than offset by strategic leveraging of several different reserve fund balances. But unfortunately, with limited revenue options otherwise, we're left with the property tax levy increasing by just about the proposed overall budget increase. So what I'm going to do next is go through the primary drivers of the changes to our budget, first on the expense and then on the revenue side. But before I do, I just want to be clear that my aim in these next few slides is really to provide the overarching framework to be able to understand what's driving the financials of this local budget proposal. In places where I refer to investments, those investments will be categorized in the priority areas described earlier by Superintendent Nally, and there will be more detail on what those investments include from a programmatic standpoint coming after I conclude the financial overview. So with that in mind, there are really four key areas to cover in terms of how we've arrived at this budget proposal from an expenditure perspective. And that's our baseline increases, so essentially the cost to do next year, what we're doing this year. Investments and additions, so that's really programming that's materially different from this year. Reductions to our local budget, and finally, things that we presently have in our local budget that we're proposing to shift to ESSER funding for next year. So starting with our baseline increases, with cost increases related to our bargaining contracts and benefits costs, taking into account known turnover and retirements, we landed at about a $4.1 million increase for next year. Our debt service, driven by BFOF school building projects, has increased by $2.2 million. We also have just under $400,000 budgeted for school buses in our baseline budget. The reason they're in our baseline budget is because these buses have state approvals with state funding that is reflected in our FY24 state subsidy that is also rolled into our baseline budget. So I wanted to account for both the revenue and the expense side of that purchase in the same place. We also have other increases that fall under transportation, most notably the cost of our crossing guard contract, as well as fuel costs. And we're also seeing increases for certain utilities, insurance, maintenance and use fees, and food services costs. The local budget also includes $3.8 million in additions or investments. By priority area, we have $150,000 in the Portland Promise, $175,000 to support multilingual learners, $590,000 in operations, and almost $2.9 million in core services. There will be more detail on each of these in a future section, but I do want to preview here for clarity that core services includes about $2 million for special education, out-of-district tuition, and transportation, and another $400,000 for 3 additional school buses. So that's 6 total buses, 3 in the baseline, and 3 additional reflected here as an investment. The difference between these bus purchases is that while all of the buses have been approved by the state, this second round is designated in a later funding year, which means we won't receive state funding for these particular buses until FY25. So it's a different strategic decision point. So I wanted to distinguish them in that way. Moving on to reductions, this budget proposes the elimination of 3.8 community coordinator positions and 1.5 mentoring coordinator roles. It also calls for a 5% reduction to non-salary department and school budgets across the board and made reductions to what will be funded in terms of cell phones across the district. As previewed earlier in the presentation, this budget also proposes shifting about $2.6 million in costs currently funded by the local budget to ESSER funding. This shift is really intended to maximize the use of our ESSER funding to preserve elements of our local programming critical to academic recovery and progress. This goes hand in hand with the need over the coming year to pursue structural changes that can enable this programming to move back to local funding once ESSER funding concludes. The areas identified to shift to ESSER funding are 9 math coaches, 7 elementary school teachers intended to preserve our ability to maintain current class sizes, 9.5 high school teachers representative of the numbers driven by our equity enhancement staffing ratios, and 5 student enrichment coordinator positions presently funded by local. Additionally, we're able to make a small reduction to our local sub budget as we propose to continue to fund dedicated subs on ESSER for next year. Moving on to the revenue side of our budget, we have a reduction of $2.4 million to our state subsidy this year, which is driven by our rapidly rising property tax valuation as calculated by the state annually. This happens because the state's funding formula requires communities with high valuation to contribute more to its cost of education than communities with lower valuations. Portland's rapidly increasing valuation has been and will continue to be a challenge in coming years, and it unfortunately has a similar impact on city municipal funding as well. On the brighter side, the state does reimburse districts for high-cost out-of-district special ed placements when costs end up in excess of what is initially allocated through the subsidy. Based on our FY24 cost projections, we're projecting a corresponding revenue offset to our increased tuition costs of approximately $500,000. We're also seeing slight upticks in each of local, food, and adult ed revenue that help to offset some of the state funding loss, and we are looking to responsibly leverage some of our existing reserves toward debt service and toward one-time purchases, specifically that one set of buses that will be reimbursed in FY25, along with an IT device purchase. Nevertheless, as previously noted, that still leaves about $8 million to be borne by local property tax. In terms of what that would mean to the local taxpayer, this budget proposal increases the local tax rate by 50 cents, representing an increase to the school tax rate of 7%. For a home valued at $375,000, that would mean a property tax increase of about $187 a year, or about $16 a month. Finally, I'd like to shift gears a bit to address our pandemic-related funding. Before I summarize the proposed plan for the use of remaining funds in FY24, I just want to step back for a moment and recap our total funding to date. All in all, we've received just under $42 million in funding since the start of the pandemic. I think the 2 acronyms that may be familiar related to this are CRF and ESSERF, with CRF being early on and over and done with, and ESSERF coming to us in 3 installments. One installment of ESSERF is over. Another is ending this year, and the last, ESSERF 3, ends next year and is where we are projecting to have about $7.8 million in funds remaining and available for use in FY24. We've really had 2 primary types of investments with this funding, characterized here as response investments and recovery investments. Response efforts were those more early on when we were focused on health and safety, facilities adaptations, and enabling remote education. Our investments, along with the funding requirements, have since shifted toward academic recovery with investments such as summer school, social emotional supports, and a wide range of other academic supports, particularly for those students most affected by pandemic learning loss. So to close, this is just a high-level snapshot of the proposed plan for ESSERF and FY24. We have the staff position shifted from local, along with investments in each of the previously named priority areas. And with that, I will turn it back to Superintendent Nally to review in more programmatic detail what's in both the local budget and in the ESSERF budget in each of the investment priority areas.
Thank you, Miranda. So since we're approaching this budget holistically across local and ESSERF, we wanted to sum up the overarching investments by priority area in local and ESSERF combined, which is reflected here in aggregate. So here you can see what we have in the local budget tied to our Portland Promise goals. which is very minimal in terms of new investments. The pre-K positions for the one expansion class are essentially a net neutral since we receive revenue for expanding into another class. And the only other addition to local for our Portland Promise investments is the added funds to enable stipended teacher leadership roles at all 3 grade spans, which is connected to an agreement in our negotiated contract with the PEA. On this slide, you also have visibility into what ESSERF investments we have now that we're planning to retain for one more year on the grant. You can see many of investments, tied to the mental and behavioral health needs of our students, such as social workers and counselors, positions at the middle school aimed at uplifting student voice, such as the Make It Happen coordinators, a handful of academic investments, such as the one teacher on full release who oversees our literacy curriculum and instruction K through 12, and a portion of the mobile makerspace teacher, which we intend to make whole by seeking other grant funds. We retained the summer school investments, but significantly reduced them from $3.2 million to $900,000 over the next 2 summers. We intend to use the $900,000 this summer, and so we will need to have another plan for the summer of 2024 if we want to continue offering summer programming. For perspective, prior to the ESSERF infusion of funds for summer school, we used to spend about $300,000 on summer. In addition to maintaining several critical investments in our ESSERF grant, we are advancing a limited set of strategic new investments, most of which do not require significant recurring costs, including literacy curriculum for K through 8, which includes foundational skills materials for grades K through 2 and literacy curriculum for grades K through 8, along with professional development funds to support the launch and implementation of these tools. Also, curriculum for SLIFE programming. SLIFE stands for Students with Limited and Interrupted Formal Education. Curriculum for social emotional learning at the secondary level, and the 9.5 FTE adds per that equity enhancement formula for high schools. As a note, the net FTE add this year is actually 0.5, but we're putting all of the FTEs resulting from this formula onto ESSER for next year. As you can see, our local investment is quite minimal, but our ESSERF investment is large. So here we wanted to bring some visibility into all of the requests that we were not able to bring forward in the proposed budget, as well as some of the cuts that were made from ESSERF in order to make space for the local investments we needed to put onto ESSERF to avoid even deeper cuts. I won't read through all of these, but you can see that there are a handful of requests intended to promote learning acceleration, such as curriculum materials in science and health, coaching supports for pre-K and Wabanaki studies implementation, and some other school-based requests. By not advancing these requests, we are acknowledging that we will not be able to make the progress we were initially hoping in these areas. In particular, I'm cognizant of the need to address health curriculum, as well as noting that by not adding more capacity for Wabanaki studies implementation, there could be an impact to the timeline for the local Black history curriculum and development. In addition, you see here other requests proposed to add more to our mental and behavioral health supports and to staff development. Also, we're making several cuts from the ESSERF grant, including the 2 BCBA, which are board certified behavioral analyst positions that went unfilled this year due to not being able to find people in time for the school year. Approximately $300,000 in contractual services related to SEL, or social emotional learning, and restorative practices. Our 5 living school year teachers, several stipends, and 1 ed tech that was added through ESSERF but is not needed to meet ratios for BREATHE next year. As I mentioned earlier, our goal was to spread out the reductions so as to avoid deeper programmatic cuts, but I noted there are a few areas where we were not able to do that. The removal of the living school year teachers from ESSERF is one of those cuts that will impact programming. These positions were the result of the innovation that was sparked by the pandemic and are designed to deepen our experiential and outdoor learning model and to align to our science vision as we work to prepare our students to be environmentally literate. The team has done inspiring and innovative work, and we are currently being studied by other districts and states that are wanting to follow our lead. These teachers have done an amazing job, and we aim to integrate this work into the experiential learning aspect of our core curriculum moving forward. Next, on to the multilingual investments. Here you see the total picture for our investments aligned to receiving many new students, most of whom are multilingual learners. The local additions are tied to our intake center, which has been beyond capacity this year, trying to keep up with enrolling students on an ongoing basis. In addition, we are adding a multilingual case manager position. This person will work year-round and support families with accessing resources in the community as they transition into Portland. They have some overlapping responsibilities with social workers and family community specialists, but they will not provide student-facing mental health support, nor will they be responsible for things like interpreting student conferences. By having this position, it will relieve pressure on the family community engagement specialists. Our aim is to hire people who are multilingual into the intake positions as well, thus further mitigating the burden on the family community specialists. This is tied to why you see we did not advance the request for adding more family community specialist roles at this time. We're using ESSER funds to add teachers per the ratio-based methodology Carlos stepped you through at a previous board workshop. As a note, we run these ratios when we're building the budget, and so they are a point-in-time reference, yet our numbers do continue to grow and change on an ongoing basis, as we've shared. The remaining ESSER-funded roles are positions we have now that we want to carry forward into FY24. As for the requests not being advanced, I already spoke to the family community specialists. Also, we handled the school-based ESOL teacher ads using our ratio-based methodology, and so this request by Reiki was not supported by that data when we ran it. As for the EdTech requests, we are retaining the language acquisition EdTechs we have that are currently in the rollover budget and funded by Title III, but we wound up prioritizing the ESOL teachers to focus on the intensive English language development for students coming in rather than the EdTech roles. We are aiming to recruit and hire ESOL teachers who are ideally multilingual themselves and who share identity with the students they serve. You can see a handful of other requests not moving forward in the budget, including the 1.0 teacher position for students who are multilingual and in our specialized programs such as Beach and Bridge. And finally, you can see we had to cut stipends and are not carrying forward a DLL, which is a dual language learner teacher for pre-K that is currently vacant, or a 1.0 FTE that was split across Deering and Portland and was always considered a one-year only position. We accounted for those two high schools' needs in the ratio-based teacher planning. And Erin, I think you'll step us through operations next.
Yes, thanks, Malia. As we now transition to our last two investment areas, we start with our operations investments. To improve our operational effectiveness, we have prioritized resources for payroll, finance, and HR to address the payroll issues that have surfaced this past year and the audit findings from our combined city and school audit. These investments include our contract with ADP to work with a dedicated payroll provider and eliminate some of the technological issues that have plagued us. It includes increases in our HR generalist positions to take on additional roles related to employee processing and adding finance team staff to ensure we have enough capacity to maintain proper procedures as cited in the audit. We are also increasing the number of custodians to allow the custodial department greater flexibility in staffing to ensure consistent coverage across all school sites. The department has struggled this year to cover all of their leaves and absences, and we have had an overall square footage increase with the progress of our BFOF projects in the elementary schools. Lastly, we propose to maintain the website manager to continue the development and improvement of our new website and communication tools. And we propose maintaining the dedicated subs across the schools who are full-time on-site substitutes to address our increased staffed absence rates and shortage of daily substitutes. Unfortunately, we are not able to advance many other important operations requests as we seek to balance our investments across the different priorities. There are important IT, food service, and additional facility staffing needs that we are unable to meet at this time. The last investment detail slide covers some of the changes in our core services. The most significant change, as we've discussed, is the increased out-of-district special education costs for tuition and transportation. In general, we serve over 99% of our students within the district, but there are some whose needs we are not able to meet in our district's specialized programs. Our costs are going up primarily for a small number of high-cost placements that are required per student's individual education plans, or IEPs. We anticipate receiving additional revenue, as Miranda mentioned previously, next spring through the state's adjustment for high-cost out-of-district reimbursement to offset some of these increases. There are other additions to our budget indicated here, including the reintroduction of the debt service for 353 Cumberland Ave, the district's offices, the purchase of the 6 new school buses, as Miranda detailed previously, the replenishment of a number of student and staff devices, and various ratio-based staffing adds, including adjustments to classroom teacher FTE and the addition of a half-time assistant principal at Presumpscot Elementary. Of course, there were numerous other potential investments in core services that we are not able to advance at this time, as well as specific reductions in our local budget that we needed to make. This includes the proposed elimination of our community coordinator positions. These staff generally serve multiple school sites and do amazing work coordinating important support such as clothing and food for our students and families, as well as managing volunteer activities. Additionally, we are proposing to eliminate the 2 0.75 FTE mentoring coordinators, one at PHS and one at DHS. These have been vacant for most of the year. Unfortunately, as we have needed to prioritize our core programming and the funding of our academic and social emotional learning roles, we are not able to sustain these roles into next year. The loss of these incredible staff members is emblematic of the difficult challenges ahead of us in this budget process and those in future years. Lastly, this final slide offers a summary of the net staffing impacts for all of the detailed proposed revisions that Malia and I have just shared. As you can see, we are establishing a total of 15.5 FTE of positions to address the priorities that we have discussed. In part, to accomplish this, we are eliminating over 18 FTE of existing positions to accomplish a budget that addresses our priorities and is mindful of our impact on local taxpayers. For our final few slides, I'll talk briefly about the next steps in our process following tonight's presentation. This slide shows the meetings and hearings we will have over the next month as we work towards board approval of the budget on April 11th. The goal for tonight is to refer our proposed budget to the Finance Committee as the next step, which will meet tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. We will have 2 joint meetings with the City Finance Committee during this time, and there will be 2 public hearings for the community to provide input. The first will be on Monday, March 20th at the Finance Committee meeting, and the second will be on the night of the first read of the budget to the full board on April 4th. As we just saw, we will be working over the next month to finalize our budget, culminating with the school board vote on April 11th. From there, we will continue our engagement with the City Council to have our budget approved by them on May 15th. And then the final step is the public referendum to approve the budget on June 13th this year. We look forward to engaging with you all and the community in this process over the next few months. With that, that concludes our presentation for this evening.
Thank you so much, Superintendents, for such a thoughtful and responsive budget. I am feeling overwhelmed with the amount of cuts that we're going to have to make in the face of such tremendous need. I also am thinking so much about the City Council meeting last night, where they are also facing almost $10 million worth of cuts to core services. So I just thank you for the amount of thoughtfulness and intention that you have put here to really align with those priorities and what we've been hearing from our students and communities, and just look forward to continuing to work with you and the rest of the board to move forward the best budget we can in this incredibly challenging time. So now, board, I'm going to look to you to move this budget to the Finance Committee. So I would ask for a motion to consider an act to refer the superintendent's fiscal year 24 budget to the Finance Committee. Is there? Thank you, Board Member Figdor, and second, Board Member Opperman. Are there any questions on the motion itself, not on the budget, but the motion? Okay. I don't see any. Let's see, any public comment on the motion, not the budget? Okay, I see none. Any board discussion? All right, then seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in favor of referring the superintendent's fiscal year 24 budget to the finance committee. Superintendent Townsend, will you please call the roll?
Yep. Member Bilyeu,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bondo,
Yes.
Member Bryden,
Yes.
Member Figdor,
Yes.
Member Grant,
Yes.
Member Opperman,
Yes.
Member Russell Better,
Yes.
Member Youssef,
Yes.
Member Ellis, Member Haymond,
Yes.
Member McLaughlin, Member Santiago, and Chair Lentz.
Yes. So the motion passes unanimously with Representative Amon voting with the majority and the other student representatives not voting. So now we're going to move to adjournment. So is there a motion to adjourn this special business meeting? Thank you, Board Member Bryden. Is there a second? Board Member Youssef, thank you. All those in favor? All right, so we are adjourned at 6:51. Thank you all, and I hope to see many of you tomorrow morning.